now. So it's now. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce David LESOLLE from Botswana in Africa, who is a former part of Botswana climate change negotiations team, as well as a former Oxford ECBI fellow. And first of all, and the most importantly, he's a meteorologist and climatologist working currently at University of Botswana. Is that true, Mr. LESOLLE?
That's true, lovely. Well done.
My pleasure welcoming you here today with us at Akademia Klimatyczna. I have some questions for you. One of them would be to perhaps help us explain people what is the difference between weather and climate, because I've heard some people saying that, actually the snow that we have been waiting for in the last few years is back, so climate change is not an issue anymore. But is actually the fact that we have snow, is it related to weather or is it climate? Can you explain, please?
Weather is what is happening now. And climate is an average of weathers. So it's like a weather of yesterday plus weather of today plus weather of tomorrow. And we add all of them up, and then we come up with an average. And then we call that the climate. So we can have like a climate of Gdansk, and that will be all the weather, different types of weather of Gdansk over the many, many years, and they taken as an average.
So in fact, the snow that we're experiencing now, it's not the climate, it's the weather. Did I get it right?
Right. What you're experiencing now is the weather. Now, we need to now start saying to ourselves, is it extreme weather? Is it different? Is it normal? And all of those questions then will help us understand whether there is changes in the climate, which we can then call climate change, or as a result of global warming, because climate change always happens. Climate always changes. But what is important is that is it a result of increased concentrations of carbon dioxide, and therefore a result of warming of the atmosphere. That's the reality. One trying to differentiate between, say, weather, climate, and climate change. In fact, the right name for this phenomenon is not climate change. It's global warming and climate change.
Thank you for this explanation.
Sometimes we just say Coca-Cola when instead of saying Coca-Cola, we say Coke. Instead of saying Kentucky Fried Chicken, we say KFC. So here we say climate change instead of global warming and climate change.
Oh, right.
Terrible. Yeah.
Thank you for this explanation. And we quite often talk about impacts of climate change. Can you tell us something about impacts of climate change you experienced in Botswana in the last 20 years, for example?
We've seen lots of changes in the climate. So, for example, the impact that we see here is that the trees that used to flower at a particular time of the year now flower either late or earlier. Birds and wild animals and domesticated animals used to give birth to their young. If it is sheep or goats, we say it's a lambing season. These times are now changed. We used to have wild berries in the bush, just like in Poland. you go for mushroom collecting. You
That's right.
remember? You go into the forest to collect mushrooms. We also in Botswana sometimes go out into the wild to collect all sorts of berries, wild berries from the trees and everywhere else. Now, the timing of the ripening of such berries has dramatically changed. So, for example, the famous Murula tree used to ripen and ready for collection around December. Now it is ripening around about 6 weeks later, around February, January into February. Now, you can imagine if I uh, have to go and collect these berries and sell them to make money,
Mm.
then it means my socio-economic impact has changed as a result of changes in the climate or as a result of climate change. So all the things that I was used to doing, say, I drink milk from the goats during this time, I'll have morula from the forest at this time, the trees would ripen, the rains would come this time of the year. All of these things have changed and they cause a chaos on and therefore the impact are far and wide. It's just not on the sectors, agriculture and what have you, in economics and trade, but also on things like the, the livelihoods of people, the socio-economic um, sort of impact.
So what does it mean for Botswana, for your country? What does climate change means for Botswana?
Well, for us, it's a huge challenge. We are worried about climate change. First of all, because we don't fully understand the impact. I mean, we see things that are happening and we now have to respond. And sometimes we don't understand everything. So the challenge is out there, first of all, to say, is it climate change? Or is it simply because of changes in the weather? But more increasingly, we are getting our scientists, ourselves, and other people, researchers, to actually come up and say and validate and say, yes, indeed, this is extraordinary. This is different. Now, what does it mean, therefore, for Botswana? It is the meaning is interpreted at various levels of society. So, for example, for the farmer, for the individual household, etc. Oh, the challenges are greater because it means they must make sure that they mobilize the resources, and the resources are not there. Sometimes, therefore, inside a year, instead of having uh, rain in Botswana, let me tell you something about Botswana. Botswana, we have, unlike Poland, we only have about 50 days of rain a year. So 315 days in a year on the average, glorious sunshine, no rain. All right. So we're very dry people. So what usually happens is that the amount of rainfall is the same, but the number of rain days changes. So that means you're getting more and more stormier rainfall. The amount of rainfall that falls at the same time instead of spreading out very nicely, easily. So for the farmer, the grasslands disappear, they are under stress. The rangelands disappear, they are under stress. And of course, so when the rangeland disappear, that means all the livestock, the goats, the sheep, from which the ordinary farmer derives meat, um, income from sales of these animals, as well as the milk for consumption, etc. So that's at the lower level. At the middle level, at the district and the town and whatever planning level, the challenges are floods, droughts, water stress, water resource management. There are health stressors, for example, heat waves, for example, um, um, outcomes of diseases as a result of changes in the weather and the climate. So certain pests and diseases we're now finding are recurring. They never used to be here. For example, the dengue fever. Now it's recurring more and more. We used to have malaria only in the northern part of Botswana. Now malaria is migrating seemingly on and affecting all the way down into South Africa. And these are the challenges at the regional level. Of course, at the government level, it's all about planning and response and resource mobilization, resources, financial, technical, making sure that the roads, the infrastructure is in place. I mean, the, the, the amount of damage caused by extreme climate events, of whether it is drought or heat or floods or wind, are all having an impact, mostly a negative impact on the infrastructure. The bridges go, the roads deteriorate, and they need constant repair, etc., etc., and therefore very costly to government. The impact across the whole spectrum of Botswanan people's livelihoods.
And if you would be asked to pick the three most pressing challenges for Botswana, how would you put them? Would it be droughts or floods? How would you?
I think floods, because we are already in a semi-arid climate, we're kind of used to aridity. We can't take it too much. We have stress levels beyond which we collapse, of course. But floods are a nuisance because Botswana is a relatively flat country. We're on a southern African plateau. The highest hill is about 1,500 meters above ground. The rest of it is very, very flat. So when it rains very heavily, water goes everywhere. And it is so terrible. So we have to invest a lot of money on drainage and stormwater drainage systems, etc., etc. That's one, floods. The second one is what I would call health-related outcomes. You know, Botswana has a population of about 2.2 million people for a size of Texas or France. So we're sparsely populated. And it means that our people are all over in very small villages. It's still very nice because we don't have big cities. We only have about two what we call big cities, but the population is about 100,000. In Poland, that's a village. But here, we need to take care of those people in the rural areas. And these are small communities, small villages. What do they need? They need a hospital. We have free health in Botswana, but they do need all of these professionally trained people. And increasingly, the challenges are huge. And the third one, of course, is infrastructure and food security and that.
So you named floods, health, and infrastructure as three main pressing issues. How about your neighbors, neighboring countries? Can you refer to them as well? Because we understand that climate change is transboundary and do not respect any borders. How about your relationship or any collaboration with your neighbors?
Yeah, I mean, climate change impact, as you may know, Botswana, like many other countries in Southern Africa, our boundaries, our political borders are along ecosystems such as rivers. So, for example, the Zambezi River, the Limpopo River in the east, etc., etc. So, because that's how that's a ecological sort of dimension in it. So when um, and our priorities are different as neighbors. So, for example, uh, for those countries that are having coastlines, uh, like Namibia, South Africa, Mozambique, etc., issues are about coastline and sea level rise and the acidification of the and increasing temperature, what sea surface temperatures, etc., on fishing and other industry. But for us, because we are inland, most cases we also form the uh, the source of the main rivers or where the rivers end up. So for example, for the Okavango, the headwaters for the Okavango is all the way up into Angola and DRC. And the water comes into the Okavango River Delta, and then it stops there in the middle of the Kalahari sense in Botswana. So whatever they do there, whatever changes in the uh, land use change and forests and whatever that happens over there is going to impact on, um, first of all, the flooding regimes, as well as also the siltation, how much dust, how much soil and clay is brought by the rivers flowing into the Okavango. So there is, of course, the impact, a two-way of whatever is happening, uh, and whatever water resource management, when we open the dams for the mini floods, etc., will have an impact on the downstream. And whatever happens in Angola and DRC, of course, therefore, will have an impact on us here. But yes, we're sharing lots and lots of resources. All of us have wildlife. And when an elephant moves from Zimbabwe into Botswana, it doesn't need a passport. So we've made these uh, trans-frontier conservation areas all around ourselves to, so that we can have the migration of these major species. Now, of course, that will impact um, on the on the humans, on the social. So you end up with degradation of lands as a result of drought, and of course the species will migrate naturally or otherwise forced by climate change. And we're seeing certain key species migrating to other parts of Botswana where they were never um, resident. And this is causing a lot of problems in the region. But yes, the priorities are different. For us here, it's about rangeland and drought, and because we are very arid compared to, say, Zambia in the north, where they have very good rains. So for them, the issues are health and what and health outcomes, uh, and uh, and forests, red, reducing emissions from land deforestation and land degradation. And then also for Mozambique, it's about floods because all the Zambezi and the Limpopo uh, flow into Zambezi. So a lot of Mozambique is the southern part of Mozambique is on the flood plains, and therefore every time there's huge extreme rainfall events, what happens in Mozambique is they end up with huge amounts of, like is currently happening as we speak. Um, and, and from a climate change perspective, therefore, there's a lot of things that are happening outside the region. For example, cyclones. Uh, Historically, climatologically speaking, we used to have like about 15 cyclones a year on the average prior to the 1970s, 1980s. And now we're talking about 30 cyclones, category 3 and more, which are major cyclones. Some of them do affect Botswana, in terms of flooding, etc. But whatever happens, every time you have a cyclone in the southwest Indian Ocean, it's either it is going to give you floods or it is going to cause drought, because as it spins, it can either suck away the moisture or pour a lot of moisture over your area. So lots of, but fortunately uh, we have uh, regional organizations. We have what you call a Southern African Development Community of, I think, 18 states now. Zambia, Seychelles, Mauritius, South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, etc. You can Google SADC, Southern African Development Community. And there's a lot of transboundary uh, management of resources and also climate monitoring programs going on in the region.
It's good to hear about mobilization on a regional level. It's always easier to understand your neighbor than, to understand someone who is on the other part of this planet. I think this is my feeling. And currently, we quite often speak about climate adaptation with a slightly different perspective. It used to be only a local issue, but is it still a local issue? I think adaptation currently is a global issue as well, because we are so interconnected. And,
it is.
And that's what is going on in one particular village could have an impact on another city or town or a street on the other side of this globe. So it's no longer adaptation being named a local issue. It's a global issue. But moving to global issues, I wanted to ask you your opinion about climate change negotiations. Having COP26 ahead of us and the United States rejoining Paris Agreement, I'd like to ask you, what do you think are the most pressing roadblocks for all of us, for international community moving ahead towards implementation of Paris Agreement, and what are the roadblocks for Africa?
One of the things that we learned from the ECBI program and also the Chatham House dialogue processes is that trust and historical relationships are very important, and they continue to be important today. We don't unfortunately trust each other. Sometimes we misspeak. We don't tell the truth about each other. But I think trust. So as you go into the COP26, remember, Botswana, for example, the emissions is about 0.02% of the globe. So what's in it for Botswana to take part in this? Botswana, like Poland, we have lots of coal, okay? And we are one of the very well-to-do countries in Southern Africa. We're a middle-income country, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we would like to make sure that carbon concepts like emissions, etc., do not go into trade. I think the smaller countries should be allowed and be facilitated in their economic growth, not to repeat the mistakes of the past. So, for example, if I went to EU or US or just cons, Japan, US, Canada, New Zealand group, and I said, guys, I need solar. Please give it, because this technology doesn't belong to government. We know that. It belongs to the private sector. So it is government that is going to buy this technology from the private sector and then negotiate the price and then transfer it to us. So they need to go and negotiate on our behalf with the technology owners to say, please give Botswana. Botswana wants to reduce the emissions. They're very small, but they're very important because they're part and part. That's what makes the economy grow. So please help Botswana. But unfortunately, we've been talking about this help for a very long time. I know they're very good efforts. I mean, now the Green Climate Fund is up and running and it's facilitated. But, you know, sometimes, Isa, I say to you, it's like giving your little baby boy a banana and you know he likes banana. But then you make it a little higher for him never to reach it.
He
But
would be
he
very
knows it.
upset. I can tell you he would be very
Yeah,
loud
yeah,
and
yeah. So,
upset.
and I,
But
and I
perhaps this
think
is
this,
what countries should do. Maybe you should get really, get together and get loud, because
unfortunately, it's very difficult because again, remember the priorities for South Africa are not the same for me, are not the same for Senegal, are not the same for Egypt, are not the same for Kenya. So what happens is we will all come and agree together that, yeah, we're going to tell them and have an Africa position. But when we get to COP26 in Glasgow, what happens? They start saying, okay, English speaking on one side, and then France invites the French speaking, and then we are all divided forever. And then when we come back, we don't trust each other anymore because we oh, it's terrible. But the negotiations must go on. Remember, for countries in Africa, for example, we are stronger together and we need to continue negotiating and um, uh, and therefore, for example, we are very happy. I'm very happy and looking forward to a renewed and a rejuvenated climate process under Biden. And I'm happy to see that he's got a very strong team behind his advisory panel. And some of them have had the honor to work with as chairing some of the sessions and the negotiation sessions, particularly under education, training, and public awareness article and other research and systematic observations as well. So I'm looking forward to the US rejoining.
I'm looking to that as well. My last question that I wanted to ask is about climate education in Botswana. What is missing in Poland, and this is what especially younger than myself people advocate for, is to make climate change education common. Common and let's put it this way, how to explain issues related to climate change to every member of our society. That's an issue that has been put forward by a group of young leaders here in Poland. And I must say, I deeply agree with that issue. And I wanted to ask your opinion. How is it in Botswana? Are people interested, or is it something that you talk on daily basis? Is it part of your school curriculum?
I teach at the University of Botswana, and I was part of the team that initiated the program at graduate level, masters of science level, on climate change. So now we have a number of course modules that we're running, which is good, but there's still a lot to be done. Um, you know, when 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 climate change impacts come, whether it is serious or cyclone or flood or whatever, or heat wave, the the tendency is that the uneducated, the poor old person at home thinks it is because God is angry or something. So we need to take that discourse out to say, okay, well, at least, first of all, let us see climate extreme events and agree that these things are happening. Let us see. So education must start about things that you see around yourself. When the apple falls from a tree, it's a thing, it is falling. So let's have a discussion around why is this apple falling? So the most important thing in my view, therefore, is let's talk about the things we see. Let's talk about the impact and not the science. Let the science explain the impact and not the other way around. So when we go to the children, therefore, children, I mean, say, middle level junior education, say the 8-year-olds up to the young adults, then all we need to do is to tell them about what used to happen because they were not there, and the things that we are seeing that are changing, and tell them a story about what it would mean possibly in the future, because these changes are going to continue. We don't know when they're going to stop, but our models are predicting that if it gets warmer and warmer and we go to 2 degrees Celsius, we might start seeing certain insects go. So in Botswana, for example, it is good to tell them stories about insects that they see, flying ones, smelly ones, ones that sting, and tell them when they, and get them to monitor the impact of climate change insofar as entomology, insofar as little things like that, as little practice, so that they can themselves start monitoring. Did I see this insect this year? Were there too many flying termites this year? Etc., etc. Things that they can relate to in their daily lives. And it's amazing what the things that we should be doing. There's still a lot to be done. But yes, I wouldn't say we've done a lot of things in Botswana, but yes, there's a lot that we need to do to go and educate our people. But like I'm proposing, I think the best lesson should always start with the practice. What do you see? What do you feel? And then we can start arguing about the science.
Thank you very much, David LESOLLE from Botswana.
And just off record, my name is LESOLLE, not double S.
Did I make it all of the other way around?
Yeah. But that's easier for me.
Sorry.
We know each other so much. That's good.
Please forgive me.
But it's been a privilege. Thank you very much.